Welcome Steve Beauchesne from Van Cleek Hill and Beau. He's kindly sponsored all the beer for tonight's event, so make sure you fill your tanks at the end of the night. So Steve comes from a business background. He started Beau's with his dad in 2006, and there's been some really core fundamental values to the way he's done business, which we're going to have a quick chat about tonight. We're going to have about an hour give or take session, and then a quick Q&A at the end for about 30 minutes. So if you have any questions, make sure you jot them down and save them for the end. All right, let's get started. So Steve, thanks for coming, man.
Hi, Franco.
So I just want to start with, where are you originally from?
Well, I was born in Newmarket. Spent my first 7 years in Holland Landing, which is a suburb of a suburb in Toronto. And then we moved to Van Cleek Hill when I was about 7 years old.
Wicked, wicked.
Can everyone hear me, or do I need to talk louder?
What?
Okay.
A little louder.
A little louder? Okay.
And what was your family life like? Sorry, were your parents kind of entrepreneurial, or?
Yeah, my dad was sort of my first experience into entrepreneurship. He was working in a business. The business actually went under, and he got together enough money and a few partners, and they actually bought the business out. And then he, was basically my first ever sort of sight of an entrepreneur, and that's where, I got a lot of my sort of appeal to that side. I remember when I was, I think I was only like 10 or 11, and it was March break, and I spent my March break reading this book that he'd picked up on starting your own business, and that was, my March break as a 10-year-old was reading that, which is kind of funny.
Awesome. I don't know what happened with the lights. Mark went to check that out. It's not mood lighting, but it's all right. Don't get too cozy with the beer, guys.
All right, we can hold hands.
We can hold hands. All right, cool. So you went to Ryerson and kind of studied business.
Yeah.
What was that like for a young entrepreneur going to university?
Yeah, so when I went to school, I had decided I was going to make my living running a record label. And so when I left high school, I went to university with a very specific purpose, and that was to start my own business, and my business was going to be a record label. I did start that up, and very quickly learned that there's no money in the music business, but still had a lot of fun doing it. And so my focus in Ryerson was very much to start my own business. The brewery is obviously a different business, but the joke is that we're running the brewery like a record label, but for beer. So a lot of the same concepts are all in place there. And it's been, my time at Ryerson was definitely well spent.
Did you have a business before, or was really the goal of going to school was really to start the record label, so there wasn't a previous business or anything?
Well, I guess my first business was my band when I was 16. Putting out records for that. I say records; it was actually cassette tapes back then. Then my first beer-related business never actually fully got off the ground, but I had registered the business name for Frisbeer. I had invented this goofy drinking game where you played frisbee and then you drank beers, and it was actually a lot of fun. But I never actually got that one off the ground. But that was my first beer-related business venture that almost happened. And then in Toronto, I was running a nightclub that was funding the record label and running and managing a band as well. So I had lots of sort of micro business ventures going on, but Beau's was my first leap into, oh crap, if this fails, I'm doomed.
So that's pretty interesting. So coming from a musical background, like just for fun, wanting to start a record label, and then you ended up getting a restaurant or the club. I guess I shouldn't call it a restaurant.
Well, it's funny because it was a really crappy diner during the day, and what we did is we paid, I think it was something ridiculous, like $3,000 a week, and we'd come in Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, take out their booze off the shelves, put booze that we'd bought on, and then run it as a nightclub. And what we did was we got all of the bands on the record label to volunteer their time working at the nightclub where their bands would play, all sorts of other bands. But then we used the profits made from running the nightclub to fund just ridiculous things. Like I remember one year at Warped Tour, we took out a booth and literally gave away something like 3,000 CDs to people, just handing them out. And I still get people to this day saying, I got one of those records. That's awesome. But so the idea was taking, this part that made a lot of money, which was the nightclub, and we could get a couple hundred people out on a good night, and found out then you make a lot more money in booze than you do in music. And then we were using that money to then fund the musical aspirations that we were all trying to achieve.
That's pretty intense for early 20s, I'm assuming.
Yeah, my days were crazy because I was working full time. So this was right after college,
okay.
And so I was working full time. So I'd finish work at about 6, go home, eat, go out, and then work at the nightclub till 2, 3 in the morning. Get up at 6 in the morning, and then do it all again. And if it wasn't practicing with the band or playing a show with the band, then it was Thursday, Friday, Saturdays were always fully booked up. Right till, you wouldn't get home till 4 in the morning after closing up usually. And my one day I took was Tuesday, and I would finish work, and I would go home. I wouldn't even eat dinner on Tuesday. I'd just go right to bed, and I'd wake up at 6 the next morning. And that was my catch-up day.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's pretty intense. And so kind of going from that scene, how did you transition to a more traditional public service setting? Because you worked at the Ontario Public Service, actually.
Well, these were happening at the same time.
Oh,
So that was the day
time.
job I was going to. Yeah. So I suit and tie by day.
By day, party by night.
And it's really funny because the two things really were great education for me. My job in the public service was business planning for the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services. And so I was leading I didn't start off leading, I started off as an intern, but by the time I left, I was leading a team of business planners, doing all the business planning for the OPP, emergency management, the fire marshal, public safety division, and all we did was build business plans. So got a really good education in building business plans and seeing new initiatives get off the ground. And then at night, I got a taste for drinking in bars. And the two things really lended themselves well together.
So when did the idea to start Beau's kind of start to percolate in your mind?
Yeah, so it was 2004. My dad, he'd been running his business all this time, and it was textile industry.
Oh, textile, okay.
Kind of a very specialized form of contract leather finishing. And the whole textile industry in Canada just basically vanished in a 2 to 3 year period. And so he went from hard times to really hard times. Sorry, he went from good times to hard times to really hard times to the day, sort of the watershed moment for us was he came to visit me in Toronto and came to let me know that his very last customer had just declared bankruptcy. So we spent the afternoon, the purpose of the afternoon was to brainstorm what he was going to end up doing with the building, which now had no purpose, what he was going to do with his career, because he wasn't quite at retirement age, and now that this had happened, he was financially unable to retire as well. And throughout the course of the day, and just spitballing different ideas for him, and it was actually my dad who said, you're always coming home with crazy beers, and there seems to be craft breweries popping up everywhere except for Eastern Ontario, and wouldn't it be cool if we started up a craft brewery? And I said, well, if you're serious, I'll quit my job and I'll sell my house and I'll move back home and I'll start a brewery with you. And we spent the rest of the day just dreaming up this brewery we were going to open. And the next day we sobered up, and it still seemed like a good idea. And literally from that point forward, from our perspective, there was no looking back. There wasn't, let's do a study on this, let's, research something. We had to do all that, and, my business planning background taught me how to, and no one was willing to give us money without it. So we still went through those processes, but on our part, there was no doubt from that first day to the day that we launched that we were absolutely going to make this happen. So it was, and I think it was that optimism and that just never even questioning it that actually got us through some of the hurdles. Because really if you go back to the day we started, which is about 9.5, almost 10 years ago, the hardest part out of all of it was convincing fools to give us money. Because, we'd never started a brewery before. Neither of us had worked in the brewing industry. Sure, we both had a bit of business background, but there was a myth at this time that people in Ottawa would not drink good craft beer. Somehow people thought that Ottawa-based taste buds were different from everywhere else in the world. And so bad at one point, we had one investor just pull out at one point because we refused to make a light lager crappy beer that he thought was essential for us to stay in business, because somehow people thought that was a good thing. And then we were going through financing for the BDC. We were trying to remortgage the building that he had to turn it into the brewery. And the account manager said, no, that'll never work. And we said, well, it will. We promise it will. And so he said, well, I'll tell you what, you go through this feasibility study, and we'll see what that says. And so we spent 3 months with the consultant, came back with a feasibility that said, yeah, I was unconvinced to start with, but this is a really good idea. And so we got the account manager on board. Then it went to the branch manager, and the branch manager's like, that's a horrible idea. So then we convinced the branch manager, and we finally got approval, and we're told this is like the first time either of them had ever seen this, but the audit division overturned them too. Because I guess the person in audit had been part of the Hart Brewing company that had gone under, and was just convinced that Ottawa would never see a craft brewery succeed. And I think that's, out of everything that we've accomplished in terms of what we've provided the community, there's now I think 15, 16 breweries in Ottawa, and I'm not saying that it's all because of us, because that would be rather pretentious of me, but it's all because of us. So what we did was we made it so that people were willing to invest. Yeah. There's an active homebrewing community in Ottawa. There always was people that could and would be successful brewery entrepreneurs, but there was no appetite in the investment market. And that's, I think, if we changed anything, that's what we changed. People were willing to give money for a startup.
So you said some pretty interesting stuff in there. Just going back to the beginning where you were writing business plans for the Ontario Public Service and stuff like that, and then you and your dad sat down. I was going to ask you, so how do you guys actually evaluate ideas? You do a lot of coaching now for other startups. Do you actually look at any financials or anything like that, or is it always just that gut optimism and you say kind of go for it?
I am incredibly optimistic and enthusiastic, and I can see a good idea when I see one.
But there's lots of bad
ideas. I can
ideas
smell
too,
a good idea when I see one. Yeah, I like to think that I'm not very talented in many respects, but I'm good at spotting talent in other people, and I'm really, really good at knowing a good idea when I see one. And because I've got my business background, I can read a business plan just by looking at the financials. I don't need to read the words usually. The words are helpful, but you can really, especially if it's an industry I know. If it's one I don't, then I really need the words. But yeah, you can look at a business plan and just really look at the financials, and you can see where the weak spots are. And I'll be sitting there with I get probably 25 would-be brewery owners come for help a year, and I sit down with every single one of them, and I can always spot out the chinks where someone's saying, well, I'm going to be making 2,000 hectoliters in my first year, and I look and I say, well, you've got a 2-barrel brew house. You're going to have to brew 40 times a day to get to the volumes, and it's like, oh, well, I didn't think. But you look at the business plan, and you're like, well, you've put in this much for a new brew house. I can tell by what you've put in that it's going to be this size, and at that size you're going to have to brew this many times, so I can look and see how much your labor you put in there, and it either makes sense or it doesn't. And then on the idea side of it, for me the biggest thing is, back in just having a great talk with Mike LaChapelle over there about the early 80s, mid 80s, when all you needed to do was be a craft brewery, and that was exciting enough because there were no small breweries at that point in time. And the world has changed from that point, and there's a lot of people that want to open a brewery, and their compelling reason to buy their beer is that they're a craft brewer. And I always say to them, there's 100 other craft brewers right now. What's your compelling reason to buy your beer? And that's where, to me, standing out is so important. Especially, craft beer is a niche market. It's not big business. You're not going to compete on price because you can't. You've got the big brewers out there you'll never win on. You can't compete on advertising, so don't bother trying. You can't compete in so many levels. So where can you compete? You can stand out in several ways. But anyone that says, I'm going to win by having this great advertising slogan that I dreamt up, that's not a good idea, no matter how good the slogan is, because you just don't have the money to push that.
Awesome. So that actually touches on two other questions that I kind of wanted to ask you. Was the first one was, how did you shift from selling music and the record label to actually selling a physical product? I know that there's a bit of similarity there, but there isn't. And then the other thing that you were just talking about, I wanted to ask you. So you often speak of some really core values at Beau's, and I wanted to ask you, why did you decide on those core values? So I think the two are related.
Yeah, I'll answer them separately,
Sure,
but
sure.
But yeah, there's definitely overlap there. I made the joke earlier. We basically market it like it's a record company, to the point where we've literally made handbills and handed them out at the door of our beers. So here's a beer that we're releasing, the same way that you'd hand out a handbill. Yeah, my band's playing next week. Another great example of how we're running the brewery like a record label. If you're in the music business, you know that all the major labels put their biggest releases out early summer, just before Christmas, try to hit on those key selling points. No major label puts anything out in February. So guess when independent labels put out their biggest hits? February. Because it's a crappy month to sell. But what that does is, if you don't have the advertising budget to compete against the latest Kanye West release, you put it out when Kanye West isn't going to be releasing anything. So we've done the exact same thing, taken that model and applied that to what we now call Brewery, BREW, and so we've now made this month-long promotion. We've done it for a couple of years now. This year we've got 106 restaurants on board, releasing a different beer every single week of the month. And not only is it great for the restaurants, because getting a customer in your restaurant in February is difficult. Getting them back there every single week in February is wonderful. And so it's great for the restaurants. It's great for us because it's sales in an otherwise really kind of crappy month for beer sales. But the best part about it is people are talking nonstop about February because no one else is doing anything right now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that zigging when other people are zagging kind of thing that really works well. And we've taken so many pages from the record label business to the point where we've now launched what we call the B-Sides brewing label, which we're literally getting artist brewers from around the world to come make beer at our brewery that we then produce, market, distribute as if it was one of our brands. And so we've got one brewer now from Denmark. We're lining up another one very shortly, and hope by 2-3 years from now to have 5 to 10 breweries from around the world all producing a brand at our brewery that you can only get in Ontario. And again, that's one of those things where there's so many similarities, but no one's opened a brewery label before. Like how did they miss that? So then to answer the other side of that question, the ethics side, growing up as a idealist punk rocker, I do have very defined feelings about how business should be and how it shouldn't be, and the idea that business should exist for the sole purpose of maximizing shareholder value, to me, is not only disgusting, but it's also short-visioned, and to me, business should be about providing something that's essential and making things better. And so we've really used the brewery as a way to, it's a conduit really to further our social agenda. It is all about the beer, and the beer is the most important thing. But we've got this really cool model now where we market ourselves by doing good things for the environment or for the community, and the community turns around and supports us back, and we've had tremendous support. Ottawa has embraced us like you wouldn't believe. Toronto's really gotten behind us. And every little small town in between too. And it is because we're doing it, and I like to think it's because we're doing it for the right reasons. We're not, cutting a check because we've done some calculation and we think that it's gonna give us a 3% lift. Half the time we're doing this, we don't even know why we're doing it. It's just, that sounds like a really worthy cause. Let's get behind it, and let's use the brewery as a vehicle to
make it happen,
to make things better. And it's a very idealistic, probably very naive view of the world, but it's working for us, so I'm going to keep it.
That's awesome. So how do you actually work on being able to keep it? Because you guys have grown to over 50 employees, maybe a little bit more now?
Yeah, we're getting close to 100 now.
Getting close to 100. Holy
Yeah.
jeez, okay. The numbers I found online lied.
No, they're just turned around, right?
So that's insane. So how do you keep those tiny family core, those really important values when you have a 100-person team?
Yeah, so our growth rate has been one of the best things, but also one of the most difficult things to manage. Our first year of business, we sold a grand total of 300 hectoliters, which is 30,000 liters of beer, which we were quite proud of. 7 years later, we sold 100 times that, or 3 million liters of beer, if I did my math right. Keeping up with that growth has been quite a challenge. We've done it in a couple of ways. One is that we've hired all of my unemployable friends. And my brother's unemployable friends, and every family member we could find. And we've really made friends and family a core value. The other joke we like to make is we've made nepotism a company value. And it has a lot of challenges to it. When you've got to give critical feedback to an employee, and that employee is also your mother. That's an odd conversation. Luckily, my mom's an awesome worker and didn't really require a lot of that. But there have been some really difficult challenges that we've faced because of that friends and family, and it's usually related to getting the most out of someone that's maybe not in the right role or whatever. But the upside of the friends and family mentality has been huge. We're not a company that works 9 to 5. 6 o'clock in the morning, we're already, emailing and phoning and calling each other, and sometimes as late as 2 or 3 in the morning, we're still working at it. There might be a beer in our hand at that point. But you put it in this way. Several of the people that work at the brewery, and I would say a good number of them, they are married to another employee from the brewery. So they wake up in the morning and they're talking about what they're going to do for their day. Guess what they're talking about? The brewery. They go to work. They spend the day working with their friends and their family, so they don't really always feel like they're at work. Yep. They're visiting, but they're getting things done. Then you go out for dinner with your friends after work. Guess what? They all work at the brewery too. Maybe have dinner with a few people. They're all at the brewery, and then you go home. You're still with someone that works at the brewery. So it's almost cult-like. But we're not drinking Kool-Aid. And the dynamic, it's not supposed to work. You're not supposed to get into business with your friends and family. It works because we make it work. And it's one of those things, I remember having conversation with my brother in one of the early days. And, we had this mountain of work we had to get done. And there was no way it could possibly, we're moving mountains at that point. And I remember turning to him, and I think he'd said something like, Steve, we can't get this done. It's not going to happen. And I said, it has to happen because this is mom and dad's retirement on the line. This is your job on the line too, and my job, sure, but this is mom and dad's retirement. And we can't screw that up. And, that was kind of like the rallying point in those early years for everyone in the family and all the friends too is like this is for real. This is not just a job you work at. All of our livelihoods, all of our dreams, all of our aspirations are built into this one entity. And so you're not just letting yourself down or your boss down if you don't perform. You're letting down your mom, your dad, your uncle, your best friend. You can't do it, it means that on our end we have to treat people like they're friends and family. You can't step on employees, but I don't think you should anyways. But we have to manage people differently. You can't just let someone go because they're not performing. You have to, give them every opportunity to succeed. And if they don't, you don't fire them. You move them to another position and let them try all over again, kind of thing. It's not a bad approach because we've got some employees now that are performing so incredibly well that we absolutely would have fired, had we based it on what we first put them tasked at. And, it was only that sort of compassion of you're not an employee, you're, someone I really care about. And I like to think that we've, done our best to embrace all our employees like that. There's been a couple learning lessons that, we've grown from where, I feel like we've probably let an employee down by not treating them like they're a family member. But, we're getting continually better at it. And I like to think that, the majority of the people that either work at Beau's now or have worked at Beau's, for whatever reason they may have left, the numbers of people that left thinking that we're a bunch of assholes, I think, is very small. I like to, at least.
That's pretty awesome. Are there some other core values in there, like besides just family? Like, I know earlier you touched on a lot of stuff about the community and
Yeah.
mixing a little bit of art in there. There was I had some notes for later, but I think it's a good time to bring it in. Like you guys just generally try to do, like you said earlier, stuff that just doesn't seem like it's going to work just because it's cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of projects we've done that we're sitting there going, I don't know why we're doing this, but it's fun.
Like I've got the Greener Futures project. You guys have done the well, we can talk about the Buy Your Bows online later too, but the Oktoberfest concert series, those ceramic bottles, stuff like that. Like,
Yeah, so that there's a lot of stuff to talk about in there. In terms of sort of the mindset behind it, I like to go back to real traditional times for breweries. And the brewery and the church were the two institutions in your town that used to support the community. It was, either the church or the brewery that, would make sure that the community was really really looked after and really thriving. And I really like to think that craft beer is a return to all of the best parts of the traditional brewery. And so supporting the community that supports us, I think, is really the core philosophy behind why we do what we do. And then all of the things that you're talking about really kind of flow from that philosophy. So our Oktoberfest is one hell of a party, but it's also a signature fundraiser for us. So last year we raised $75,000 for charity, and at the same time we spent $300,000 on local businesses to put off the event. And on top of that, we're told the estimate sort of external economic impact of putting on Oktoberfest was about $1.5 million in a very rural part of Eastern Ontario that otherwise wouldn't receive that kind of impact. The charities that we work with are ones that, obviously we're happy to support, but we've also got a very inclusive approach to that. So one of the things that we decided very early on not to do was to pick one or two charities and throw all our donation money to those specific charities. So we give gift baskets to little church choir fundraisers, and we also work with United Way and Red Cross, and at the same time there'll be non-registered charities that can't give us a donation slip, so we technically can't call it, we don't get the tax write-off or anything like that. But it's a worthwhile cause, and they're, a grassroots organization that's maybe just doing a block party, but they're trying to raise money for one family that, needs help. And yeah, of course we'll donate to that. That's cool. Our three kind of pillars that we really try to focus on are just charitable work, so the United Way, the Red Cross, places like that. Community building events and activities like the block party and the little old church lady group, and then independent arts is the other one that we really try to focus on, and a lot of that stems from I would say at least half the brewery is either a former musician or still actively a musician. We've got one of our drivers is nominated for a Juno this year. We've got one sales rep who needs to take off at least 2 weeks a year to go tour Europe. We're a group of very creative, passionate people, and the arts is something that really needs support, because they don't get to fundraise the same way that registered charities do. So putting money into the arts is a big thing for us. And so you look at our Oktoberfest lineup, and the headliners probably don't need our help. Sloan does not need our help to gain, get them the awareness. But Young Rival, who's a kick-ass band from Hamilton, they got a lot of exposure by playing that show. And so when we book the bands for that, there's a real strategy behind that of, yeah, we need the headliner to bring people in, but then let's really treat people to something that's spectacular. Along one of the lines of things that we did that we probably shouldn't have bothered with, we did a 2-pack Halloween release, and we commissioned an artist named Dirty Donnie, who did these awesome Rat Fink style labels of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Those are the name of the 2 beers. And then to make it support the arts, we included in every single package. It was supposed to be this really kind of creepy looking translucent purple 7-inch record. And we had, who do we have on that? We had the Flatliners, Chris Rayburn, who's now one of our sales reps, but I met because he showed up at the brewery going, I wrote a song about you guys. So we hired him, of course. But who else did we have on that?
Flatliners.
Oh, it's going to come to me. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Teenage X was on there. All sorts of good, creepy kind of music. It was supposed to be on this awesome translucent purple disc. It shows up soft bubblegum pink
Oh, no.
for our Halloween release. And we got so many comments. Half the people are like, what the hell were they thinking? The other half were like, bubblegum pink, it's the creepiest color you could have put in there. All right. It was totally not supposed to happen, but it did. But because of all the work that we put into this, the stupid thing had to sell for, I think it was $18 a box or something. And I think we maybe sold 5 of them or something. But we got so many people calling up saying, I just want the beers, and so many people calling up saying, I just want the records. And it was a fun project. We got a lot of press. We were getting press all the way from Australia on that project.
Wow.
Horror magazines picked it up because I guess Dirty Donnie, has done some work in that genre, and so it was, from a media perspective, great, but total flop from a business perspective. But it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So back to the business perspective for just a second. Like, how did you guys get your first customer, first sale? How did you approach that as a new brewery, as a new company? Outside your immediate family and friends.
Yeah. So I mentioned that the bank forced us to go through a feasibility study, which was a huge waste of time and a pain in the butt as far as I was concerned, except for one very important thing. We had our sales projections in there, and the consultant was like, there's no way you're going to get that many restaurants to say yes to you. It's just not going to happen. We said, yes, it will. He said, go out and prove it. Go out and get letters of support from restaurants and see how many you can get. And so we literally pounded the pavement. It was my dad and my brother Phil who pretty much did the most of it. And they just they would go into downtown Ottawa and just they'd come down and say, hey, we want to open a brewery. This is kind of the stuff we're thinking about. If you think you might carry our beer, could you write a letter of support for us? And we got something like, I think it was like 85 or 95 in a couple weeks. And that's what really convinced the consultant. Because in his mind, it was, this was going to be the time where we found out that reality was horrible. And in fact, we showed him that no, it's pretty awesome. But that's a long-winded story to get to. Our first sale ever was Dad and Phil walked into the Black Tomato with the idea of trying to get a letter of support. And Pete, who's an awesome guy, has been running it for forever, was at the bar that day. And they said, hey, we're starting up a brewery in the area. And before they got another word out of their mouth, it was like, great, when can I get it? Nice. That was our first sale. We're starting up a brewery. Great, when can I get it? And that was all Pete cared about, was having a local brewery. And so our first 7 restaurants that we launched with on Canada Day were the Manx, the Black Tomato, 2 of the Clock Tower locations, the Vankleek Hill Tavern. If you've ever been, who's been to the Vankleek Hill Tavern? Oh, you gotta go.
The guys from Beau's.
It's been in the family for over 100 years. It's pretty awesome, and it's very taverny. Then the St. Eugene Tavern and the Hawkesbury Golf and Curling Club. 2 weeks later, we'd lost 4 of the 7. But from that point on, we grew at a very consistent rate when it comes to the restaurant side of things. It's very different for the LCBO, but with the restaurants, it's math. Every time I sit down with the sales team to go over the numbers, we do it quarterly, and every time I say sales for us, at this point it's math. If you go out to see this many restaurants, you will get this many new accounts. If you get this many new accounts, this many will take off. If you get this many that take off, here's your spin-off effect that comes from that. And it's obviously a lot more than that, and the salesmanship needs to be there, and the customer service needs to be there. Everything needs to be right. The beer has to be awesome. We have to land on everything. But so long as we do the everything else, a certain number of sales calls equals a certain number of restaurants, and almost from day one, we've continued to gain a new restaurant a week per sales rep. Sometimes it's a little bit higher, sometimes it's a little bit lower, but consistently year over year, that's our model, and it'll be different for every single brewery, and we do find it, it's sometimes different for different reps. We've got our sales rep now in west of Toronto is literally closing 3 to 4 accounts a week on average and that's over a year and a half period. Well, no, a year long period now. And I think it's because he's the nicest human being in the planet. But it could also be because he's got really cool dreadlocks. I don't know. It's one of the two.
Does being restricted to Ontario just because of the provincial beer laws, does that kind of hinder you guys or upset you a little bit? I know you're doing a little bit up into New York and with the Tom Green, so that's a little bit different. But like, how does that? Or is Ontario still big enough for you guys? You're happy to keep it here?
What we basically did when we started was, let's not worry about how we wish the system did work. Mm-hmm. Let's worry about how the system actually works. So don't get me wrong. There's changes that could be made that would make our lives a bit easier. Particularly, we're less than 30 kilometers from the Quebec border, and 7.5 years in, we're still not selling to Quebec, and that's a frustration. But we very much decided that there's no point in complaining about what doesn't exist when we can focus on what does exist. And so we've dedicated our energy towards the system that is. When it doesn't mean that we're not actively engaging our MPP and our MP about how we'd like to see changes. But that's structural stuff that we really don't have a lot of time for, because for us it's the day-to-day, and it's one of those funny things that for a small craft brewer, you really need to focus on getting your next customer, getting your next fan. Mm-hmm. You can't really be focused as much on big lobbying efforts to structurally change the playing field. And I think that's one of the big differences with small brewers and very large brewers. The large brewers are able to compete on a very structural level. They've got lobbyists, and they've got lobbying groups that are doing nothing other than trying to change the playing field to further their interests. Yep. We don't have the time, we don't have the money. So we've got to focus on working with the system the way it is. And for us, it's about being nimble, being able to, dodge the steps of the giant kind of thing.
So you mentioned earlier that getting that funding was a huge roadblock in the early days.
Yeah.
To starting the brewery. Is there any other major challenge then and now that you guys are still facing, or that you did face and did overcome?
Well, it's a nice problem to have, but keeping up with demand has been our biggest problem. Really from day one. our first batch of beer won the award for best beer at the festival at the Golden Tap Awards in Toronto. And this was 3 years before we were even selling beer in Toronto. But from that point on, there was interest and awareness and desire, and for us, a lot of what we've been doing is trying to keep up with the demand that we've created. And I like to think that we've created a compelling brand, and we've done a lot to build fans and super fans. And the hardest part for me is when we disappoint them, because we just can't make enough beer at certain times. There was one time where with the LCBO, we had the way we used to bottle beers, and I'll give a little demonstration. You'd take the bottle in this hand, and you'd take a Blickman beer gun, which is a homebrewer's tool, and you'd put it in the bottle, and you'd squeeze one trigger to get CO2 in the bottle to get the oxygen out, and then the other trigger fills it slowly from the bottom. And all of that would take you about a minute and a half. And that was our bottling line. And then when we got really, really tight, our bottling line doubled because we bought two Blickman beer cans. And then we moved to a little 2-head modest filler, then a little modest 4-head filler. We started with no money. Like our pockets could not have been shallower. The first couple of years, just keeping the lights on was, enough accomplishment to go home and feel proud of yourself. And at the same time, you'd have this customer that loves you to death, and they're so frustrated because they went to the LCBO, and darn it, the beer wasn't there. And then we'd get calls from the LCBO going, "You realize people are coming in and yelling at us, right?" And we're like, "We're so sorry." So we created these little, again, handbills. It's all a record label, but these little handbills that say, "We're really sorry," and a picture of us kind of frowning or whatever, and it basically said, "Please don't yell at your LCBO person. They're trying their best. It's us. We can't make enough beer." And they would hand it out to everyone that yelled at them. And there were stores that literally, the LCBO employees were so awesome. They would keep a separate list of Beau's fans and their phone numbers, so that when we actually delivered beer, they'd get on the phone and be like, "Guess what? It's here. Get here today or else it's gone." And it was crazy. The excitement that built up, and there'd literally be times where the driver's pulling in with the 2 cases we could give them, and there's 8 people lined up waiting for that to go from the back room and it's just gone, and I'm not complaining about any of that because it's wonderful that we had that kind of support and that kind of demand for our beer, but the psychological impact of letting people down is pretty tough. And so our challenge has always been that, and since day one, everything that we've made has been reinvested right back into the brewery to try to keep up with this demand. And I'm still renting a house since I sold my house to start the brewery. So I'm still renting. I'm still swimming in my own credit card debt from starting the brewery off and financing things with my credit card. I still drive a really, really crappy car. This is not we've been incredibly successful, and we've done incredibly well, and we've been very frugal the whole way through. So when it comes to the quality of our beer, we spend and we invest and we do everything we can. When it comes to the trappings of success, we've largely ignored them. Don't get me wrong, I'd like to own a house again one day. It was kind of nice, but it's so far less important than that next tank that's going to get that much more beer out the door. So that's kind of the other big challenge for us has been keeping up with that growth, and in doing it in a way where we don't sell out. There's an awful lot of people that are willing to drive a dump truck of money over to us, and then we get to relax. But to me, it's the death nail in any good business. you can look and pretty much every good brewery that's sold majority to outside investors or gone IPO, it's dramatically changed their business. There have been a couple success stories where they started off going public and they set it up that way, but the companies that sell out, and again, it all depends on how you determine what success is. I'm sure many of them sell dramatically more beer than they did when they were independent, but in my heart, they've failed, and I think when you talk to people that are really passionate about the beer industry, a brewery selling out is usually the point where you stop caring about them. And for me, Beau's is a legacy project. I've put at least half of my last name into the brewery, and to me that's far too important to risk just for the financial reward of it.
Wow. So, how did you guys go about creating these super fans, building that brand? Was it just the core values and the messaging, but or how was it calculated or developed over time?
Yeah. So one of the things I think that I kind of alluded to this earlier, that there are ways that craft breweries can compete that big breweries can't, but I didn't actually go into what those things are. One of the biggest things for me is that a small brewery can have an actual relationship with its customers, and that's how we build fans and super fans. Is we actually converse with you. You can send me an email and I'll get it and I'll respond to it. At times it might take me a couple days if my inbox is full, but it'll get to me. And we do things for our fans. We've done, one fan of ours wanted to propose to his girlfriend at the brewery, so we made a special bottle, and we had a sticker on it, so that they bought the bottle, and when she flipped it over, it said, "Will you be my beau for life?" or something like that. We had another fan literally get married at our Oktoberfest this last year, which was hilarious. The bride actually ended up in the dunk tank of beer at the end of the night. Martin Pajot is super enthusiastic fan, and it was his birthday, so his girlfriend got a hold of us and said, "Can you do something special for him?" So she brought him to the brewery, and we gave him a full day of being part of the brewery. He got to do a tasting panel. He spent some time with the brewers making beer. He spent some time bottling beer. Got to spend time in the retail shop. We put him to work, basically. Got free labor for the day. But he
just loved it.
He absolutely loved it. It was a thrill for him, and it was. I like to see how fun it is for all of the people that work at the brewery, because when he was with the brewers, you could just see the brewers. They're excited about showing what they're doing, and he's doing the tasting panel, and people are they're excited for him and they're excited with him. So it's good for us too. One of the things we used to do that we're actually bringing back this weekend, Laverne and Shirley parties. So again, when we were filling one bottle at a time, the packaging of that beer was far more than we could do. So about 1 or 2 Sundays a month, we'd have a Laverne and Shirley party where our fans would just come in, they'd package beer with us, and it was so cute. My daughter would be sitting there and she'd taskmaster anyone that was slowing down. I'm like, "Yeah, get back to work." She was like 3 at the time, which was just ridiculous. But they'd spend the day with us, and then at the end of the day, they'd all come back to my place and I'd cook up a spaghetti supper, because spaghetti is really easy to cook for 8 to 10 people. And the people that came to those Laverne and Shirley parties, they still come back. And this is 5-6 years ago, and I know that they still tell their friends about the time that they went and packaged beer and had supper with one of the owners, kind of thing. So we've got this really cool release that we're doing in March in the LCBOs, and our creative team's gone way overboard with it. There's like a wrap and a sticker and a hang tag, and we're just all sitting there going, the packaging team can't keep up with this. What are we gonna do? I'm like, well, let's bring back the Laverne and Shirley parties. So
awesome.
this Sunday we're gonna have a pile of volunteers in, wrapping up bottles and putting them in boxes for us. And it's one of the things that we've learned is that for our base of fans, they don't necessarily respond well to promotions. They're not looking for free stuff. They're actually quite happy to pay for our beer. What they want is access to us. They want the inside scoop. They want to feel like they're friends, and they're not going to feel like friends if they're not.
Mm-hmm.
So we go out of our way to be there for people, and they come out and they support us, and they support you like they're supporting a friend, not like they're, it's just a brand that they like kind of thing.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah. Think that's enough of an answer for that one?
That was awesome. So there's one more like major component that I wanted to touch on was, you guys launched Buy Your Bows online.
Yeah.
Not too long ago.
Yeah, that's a good story.
So basically, yeah. So there's lots of challenges with that, but it's also something that's pretty cool, I think. So can you tell us a bit more about what it was like to launch Buy Your Bows online?
Sure. So the genesis of this, we started working with a charity called Operation Come Home many years ago. At the time, we were selling our beer in these ceramic bottles, and the beer store was refusing to return them to us. So we talked to Operation Come Home, and we got them to create these drop-off locations where if you brought your bottle back to them, instead of giving it to the beer store, we would pay Operation Come Home $2 for every bottle that got brought in. So, and then they used that, they would hire street youth to sort the bottles and collect them to bring them back to us. And great program because it provides employment experience, as well as when someone's in there, that they're that much more likely to access the services that Operation Come Home actually offers. And so the social supports are there, the employment's there. There's that much more chance that someone else might hire them down the road. So Elspeth, who's the director there, asked to meet up because they wanted to expand the program. And their idea at the time was, you've got a blue box and a green box. Why not a brown box? And you put your empty bottles in there, and then we'll go collect them. And what I said to Elspeth at the time was, well, if you want to pick up people's empty bottles, you might as well bring them full ones at the same time, because there's a lot more money in bringing people full beer than picking up the empties. And so we started looking at that, and in Ontario, there's this license you could get to be a home delivery service. And so we said, well, why don't you get a home delivery service license? And thought, well, that's great. And we're like, well, no one's done this before in the brewing world, but we looked through the rules, and we're not lawyers, so we did our best interpretation of them and thought it all seemed pretty legal. And so we said, well, what the hell? Let's try it out. So they applied for the license. They got the license, no problem. And things started to get funny. It was 2 days before we launched. It took them a long time to get the program to make sense from a sort of not a business perspective, but from the social side of it. So making sure that the youth were supervised. They didn't have access to beer. They didn't have access to cash. Enough supports in there to make sure that it was run responsibly, basically. And after figuring all that out, we were just getting ready to launch. We hadn't really started the press release yet, but we did our last meeting before launching with Operation Come Home, and my sister, just kind of on a whim, took with her cell phone a picture of the Operation Come Home van, and put out a Facebook message and a tweet saying, coming soon, this van will bring you beer. And before we got back to the brewery from that meeting, CTV and CBC both had cameras on their way. And we're like, this is a bit bigger than we thought it was going to be. And CBC in particular, they took the sort of controversial aspect of it. And how dare you let homeless people have booze, and what are you doing? And do the kids even have driver's licenses? I'm like, yes, they do have driver's licenses. I kind of feel like they went sensational on purpose to just give us the media, because there wasn't any backlash, and the comments that all came in were incredibly supportive, and I kind of feel like they felt they had to make it a little sensational because they were putting it on the news. But because they put it on the news, someone decided they didn't like it, and they had a better understanding of the law than we did. So there was 2 loopholes that we didn't catch. One was that for a home delivery service to work, it had to be purchased at an LCBO store. It's not the way it's written in the actual language of the bill. They word it as an authorized and operated government store. Our brewery retail store is a government authorized store, which is why we thought we were okay. It was the word operated we didn't catch on to. That meant LCBO, and we were somehow supposed to know that the word operated in that case was somehow different than every other case. And there was another loophole that breweries weren't allowed to help out the delivery service at all. It had to be completely separated. So because we'd built the website for people to use, we violated that part, and because they were buying it from our retail store, we violated that part. Someone, and this is kind of the funny part, is the AGCO, when they came down and shut the whole thing down the day it opened, they weren't supposed to tell us, but they did tell us that the complaint had come from another brewery. And in just kind of thinking about it rationally, no one else would know that those rules existed, because we read the stuff and we didn't know they existed. So wouldn't you know, we literally got shut down the day that we opened. I think a grand total of 5 deliveries made it to customers that day. And we hear from those customers, they're like, yeah, I was one of the ones that got it the day it got shut down. Were you one, Brad?
No, I was
Oh,
not.
okay. Okay.
I wish I was.
But yeah, so you got shut down that day.
I remember reading about it in the newspaper.
Yeah, and I was just so bummed, because not only was it, all this work that we'd put into it, it's just shut down, but we'd hired, was it 2 or 4? I think it was 4 homeless youth who had been, knocked down, beat down. Here's this great opportunity to get your life back on track. You now have a job, you now have employment, you now have all this stuff, and then it's just like April Fools, you're back on the street. Deal with it, and it just seemed like such a cruel joke to these poor kids, and I was just furious. So I wrote a blog post on my blog, and I titled it. It was close to Christmas, so I titled it, "The Grinch Who Stole Your Christmas Beer," or something like that. And if that picture had gotten attention, that blog post went crazy, and all of a sudden, CFRB in Toronto's calling, and National Post is there and getting interview requests from BC, and it went national really fast, and we kind of had everything on our side except for the law. Okay, that's a funny way to put it.
They all say.
The law was unreasonable.
We were doing something that was good for the community. We were doing something that was good for our customers. These were silly rules that shouldn't have been in place. And within 8 days, it had been debated in the Ontario legislature. Dalton McGuinty personally read my blog entry and commented and tweeted on it. And then 8 days later, the law was literally changed. So if you've ever thought that government works slowly or can't affect change, 8 days and a law was changed. And we were back up in business the next day. I remember the day that our MPP called. We were right in the middle of a staff meeting, and I'd just done this update on, they tell us they're working on it, but at this point it's done. And then the phone rang, and I looked down. It was our MPP, and so I picked up the phone, and I was like, "So what's up?" He said, "Well, we've been able to change the law, so you're back in business." And there was, at that point there was probably 30 of us in the brewery, and I said, "Hey guys, it's Grant Crack," which is a really funny name for this whole story. On the phone, he's just got the law changed, and just the whole brewery just erupted. And I think it was a pretty impressive moment for both me and our MPP. But yeah, it was just this crazy moment of how did this happen? It's like the Dead Kennedy song, as I fought the law and I won. But yeah, just crazy.
It's an amazing story.
And now, so the downstream impact of that is we've now hired something like 10 different youth, and we've got just this ever-growing list of awesome stories. One of them saved up enough money to go back and put themselves through university to afford to go back to university. Another one was able to get enough job experience and enough money to get an apartment and get a full-time job somewhere else out of it. And then some of them are just really basic things, like having a residence so that you can get your birth certificate, because they won't give it to you if you don't have an address. And without your birth certificate, you can't get this, and without that, you can't get that, and all sorts of just. Some of them are very basic stories, and some of them are, wow, university. That's pretty awesome.
Huge, yeah.
And it's impacting, people's lives. On top of that, I've had wineries come up and, drive to the brewery specifically to thank me, because now they've got another way to get their wine to customers. And it's very difficult for wineries. If you're not on the shelves of the LCBO, there's nowhere else you've got except for your own little winery shop. Now you've got farmers markets too, actually, but back then you didn't. And you've got Brad there, who's launched Brew Donkey, which is a home delivery service for other breweries' beer, and it's spinning off all these awesome results that would have never come about had this not happened. So it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So looking back, where you
and we sell more beer.
And you sell more beer. So looking back where you are now, if you had to do something over again or start over again, would you do it any differently? And what advice would you give to another entrepreneur who might not necessarily be starting a brewery, but
The do things differently is a tough question, because it's like that conundrum. If you go back and you sit on a butterfly and then suddenly you come back and your tongue's all hanging out weird from evolution. I've
never heard that, but all right. I've never heard that. I'm sorry.
The path we've taken has been the path we've taken. Some things didn't work the way that we hoped they would, but to say that if we changed that, would that not have had a ripple effect that would have made us a different company? And I'm incredibly proud of the company that we've got. I'm incredibly proud of the people that work at the brewery, and I'm incredibly proud of the accomplishments we've achieved. We started from scratch, and we started with basically no money in our pockets, and we've built something that really matters to people. And I think that's, when I look at success, that's to me the big thing is it's not, what our revenue was this year or what our profitability was. It's we've made something that people care about. And to me, that's really special. In terms of advice for would-be entrepreneurs, a few things. One is, trust your gut more than you trust a consultant. No offense to any consultants in the room, but consultants are really good at telling you what other people have succeeded at. If you're going to do something that's successful, I really think you need to do something that's different. And a consultant's usually the worst person you can ask, unless they specifically consult on coming up with brand new ideas, which I don't know that exists. That'd be a cool consultant job. Maybe I'll start that up after. In terms of, sort of getting off the ground, be willing to put everything into it. Out of the 25 people that come see me every year, can always pick out the ones that aren't ever going to get off the ground. And those are the ones that start off by saying, well, I need to make sure I'm making $60,000 a year, and I need to make sure that, my RRSP contributions are in place, and I need... Good luck. Good luck. The first couple of years at the brewery, we were so broke. How broke were you? So the first year, out of my family, and my mom and dad, my mom was the only person bringing a paycheck, and she was working as a shoe salesperson. And then after working the whole day, would then come back home and do the books for us at night, because she was also our bookkeeper. When I got my first, and I was living right in the house with them for the first till we couldn't stand it any longer, and then when we finally moved into a place, money was so tight I couldn't afford wood for the furnace. I literally would go into the barn at night and pick wood off of this old barn behind my house and just grab scraps of wood to keep the house from freezing at night. And it's just what you had to do. It was either that or one of our employees didn't get paid. And I went the first year without collecting a paycheck because someone else needed that paycheck. And times were tight. We had to walk to school both ways. But uphill both directions. But that, I think in a lot of ways, that gave us the drive. We were quite literally hungry for that next account. And I would go into work. I'd go into work at 6 o'clock one day. I would work through the clock, work through the next day, and then get home about 10 o'clock, 36 hours later. And I would do that a couple times a week because you'd spend the whole day, when other people are working, you got to do your working stuff, but then you need beer in bottles, so I'd literally bottle till 4 o'clock in the morning every night, which wasn't as bad as it sounded because we'd have a ghetto blaster going. And it was kind of a one for me, one for the customers kind of approach.
I had a feeling that's where that was going.
And every night I'd have someone else in there with me, and we'd all take turns, and the beer would get into bottles, and I would get a few beers in me too. But that's just how it had to be. So my last piece of advice for a would-be entrepreneur is try to have more money than we had to start with, because as much as I don't regret any of it, I could not put myself through that again. I physically could not deal with it. And I feel like I've taken a couple years off my life just by the sheer amount of work that required. Not that I'm complaining.
So I think I've monopolized you long enough. Do we have any questions from the crowd for Steve? Go for it.
Yes, Steve, you mentioned that you were quite broke at the beginning, right? But now, 10 years down the road, do you consider yourself a wealthy person, or were you still living, like you mentioned, in a rent apartment, drive a crappy car? So what was it worth it in financial sense?
In a financial sense, I, as of last year, started making how much I was making when I left the government 7 years before. I probably would be making more had they, continued to employ me. I'd also have a pension plan and things like that. But I'm not, I'm not hand to mouth anymore. I'm quite happy with the salary that I'm making. I've never really been particularly financially motivated. So I don't need a fancy car. I don't need a lot of fancy things. For me, it's I love what I do, and that no amount of money can change that. I wake up every morning, and I'll set my alarm for 6 or 7. I wake up at 4 every day, and I bound out of bed because I'm so excited about what I get to do today. And I'm sitting here right now, technically working while having a beer, talking about what I love. This is very much a lifestyle business, but we've been lucky. We have grown. The company's financially stable, and while I might not be personally financially motivated, I understand that financial stability and growth for the company is what lets us do all the fun stuff I love to do. So when it comes to running the business, I make sure that we're turning a profit. I make sure we're doing well, but I make sure we're doing it the right way. I should have mentioned somewhere in the conversation. I haven't. We're Canada's first registered B Corp brewery. So if you're not aware of what B Corps are, it's short for Benefit Corporation. So it's a high level of certification that takes all of the integrity and ethics and transparency of your company, and if you meet the benchmark, you're allowed to pay them money. And then you become a B Corp, but you literally need to change your papers of incorporation to specifically state that you're not just in business to maximize shareholder wealth. You also are in business to look after your employees, your environment, and your community. And it's to me, it's the idea of sustainability is such a powerful one, because right in the definition of sustainability is profitability for my company. None of this is sustainable if we can't keep the lights on. And so I do make sure that the business is well taken care of and is able to prosper, but I'm able to do that in a way where I'm not doing it on the backs of my employees. I'm not doing it on the environment. I'm not doing it on the community. The idea is, if this is done right, we should all be able to prosper.
Mike?
Yeah, you made a really interesting comment about, when you're creating, you're resegmenting market and creating a nice little niche for yourself in there. The foolishness of trying to take on the incumbents in their strength of advertising and all those kind of things. Maybe you could speak for a minute to, the importance of the network effect and how you guys have leveraged that with those legendary events, the parties out at the brewery.
Yeah, so talked a bit about Oktoberfest in February, and we've got a retail shop that brings about 300 to 500 people through the brewery every week. I also talked a bit about the relationships we have with our customers, and this is where kind of the two come together. By creating a relationship with you, the goal is that you not only drink our beer, but that you go out and talk to your friends and convince them to drink our beer, and hopefully then they come to the brewery, get the really big experience, and then it's that spreading the impact out. And I think a lot of this again comes back to the rock and roll days, where if you went and saw a kick-ass band, when you left that venue, you were just on cloud 9, and you bought their hoodie, their t-shirt, every single one of their albums in both CD and vinyl, even though you don't own a vinyl machine, because you just had to have that record. And and then you go and they played in Ottawa, but then you traveled and you saw them in Montreal and Toronto, and that fan aspect that drives that. I find a lot of it's that experience driven, and so when we do our Oktoberfest, the idea behind it is, let's take all of the culture of Beau's, all of the the things we're trying to achieve, and let's distill it down into one experience for someone to have. And then when someone comes, they should walk away with all of the things that we want them to walk away with. So here's a company that's fundraising, making wonderful beer, making unique beers, making different beers, but also bringing in other breweries so that they're part of the brewing community, and they're supportive of other breweries. And there's 20 awesome restaurants and the food's amazing, but the restaurants are all partying along because to them it's the weekend they look forward to as well. And then the bands are there, and they're all really awesome indie bands that you put that all together, and then you throw in a bus tour to the brewery, and you've got something really special that people look forward to, and it gives people that it's almost like visiting Mecca. Not to say that we're as big as Jesus or Muhammad or anything like that, because that would be the Beatles. But it is, what we're trying to do is give people a reason to come visit us once a year, if not more. Like, it's great when people come several times, but at least one time a year you make the distance to the brewery. And it's also part of our strategy to try to keep the beer within a 1 day's drive of the brewery. Sometimes what is successful is also what's limiting to your business model. And I'm very happy to say that we say no to probably 10 times more ideas than we say yes to. Because quite often someone or something or some opportunity arises, and it's going to get you sales today, but it's going to water down your brand, and that's going to hurt your sales tomorrow. And as I always go back to, tomorrow's sales are so much more important than today's sales, because tomorrow just keeps coming, and today's only today. Yeah.
Just a question about building the brand or your budget. And I'm just wondering, you talked about the experience and the Oktoberfest, but coming out of the gate, you didn't have that sort of awareness. So how did you come out of the gate with your logo and with your brand sort of identity set? Or is that something that evolved?
It's a great question.
Brand, or did you come out looking and sort of feeling like this from a brand experience?
Yes. So our creative director, who does all our design, he's a buddy of mine from back in the rock and roll days. He used to design the artwork for our records. I keep calling them records, CDs. They were CDs mostly. When he found out we were opening a brewery, he basically begged us to volunteer his time to work on it. And we said, well, we can't pay you, but I guess we'll let you do it for free. And we're quite fortunate. He's incredibly talented. Obviously it's evolved over the 7 years. Where we started isn't where we are today. But having Jordan doing the design work for us was very key. And as soon as we could, we offered him half as much as he was supposed to be making, and he was kind enough to join us because he wanted to be part of this cool project too. And this is now, I think, one of the key things that Beau's has that most breweries don't have is we've got literally, I would say, a fully functioning agency that works inside the brewery. So we don't ever go out to external advertisers. We don't do external marketing. We do it all in-house, and I think we're doing it at a fraction of what other breweries are spending because we're just paying salaries as opposed to the ridiculous markups and the churns. Again, I'm sorry if you work at an agency. I'm sure you do wonderful work, and I'm sure you're the exception to the rule. But but we get incredibly good value for our dollar, and we also have people that are immersed 100% into our brand. But yeah, those starting days, we had to use a lot of creativity, and a lot of it was do it yourself. And that's still, if you read our banner, most of our things, we've got 5 pillars that we kind of go on. That's local, family-run, award-winning, organic, and totally DIY. And DIY is do it yourself, and that's been part of our mentality from day one. To the point where if you've been to the brewery, you see the barn board that's clad on there. That was us banging up the wood. The mural that's out front, there's got to be something like 700 little round dots that I personally painted on the stupid thing, and I hated every minute. Well, the first 4 hours were fun. A couple weeks into it was horrible, but we did it ourselves. We've designed everything ourselves. The custom bottle, the 4-pack box, everything we've done ourselves. And when we didn't have money, we had creativity. The first time we ever went to the wine and food show, it took every last penny, like you wouldn't believe, to scrounge up the booth fee. And then as the day came closer, we're like, we can't afford a booth. we were so naive at the time. We didn't realize you needed a booth. We thought the booth fee got you a booth, but no, it just gives you a 10 by 10 square. So we kind of struggled with, well, what are we going to do? We can't, there was no money to pay for anything. So we went to a local farm, and we bought a bunch of hay bales for $2 a bale. And we built this bar out of hay bales, and then just took barn board and just laid it on top. It wasn't even screwed in or anything. And then cut a hole in it, put a beer tower on top, and that was the booth. And the amount of excitement people got out of that was insane, because you walked in that front door and you were confronted with the smell of fresh hay. And you went and you found it, and there was this giant hay bale bar that cost us $25 in materials, and it was so impressive. We literally signed up 8 new restaurant accounts at that show, and you'd walk around. We spent that whole show trying to guess how much other people had spent on their booths. We're like, $25, suckers, And now that we have had a bit of success, it's one of the things that we sometimes need to reinforce on our own side is, what got us to where we're at needs to continue to be part of who we are. So just because there is a bit more money in the bank, we still have that same approach to frugality and the idea that a creative idea is so much more valuable than one that costs a lot of money. And that's something that we have to continually reinforce in ourselves, so we don't ever get complacent or boring.
I think there's one. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I recently went to a food and wine show similar to the one that you mentioned, and you tried to bring hay in.
Yeah.
And you were shut down.
I know.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we got really lucky that first time.
Really, yeah. So now it's a fire hazard. I showed up and you're like, yeah, we got bales of hay sitting in a loading dock, and they're showering in non-flammable liquid to make sure this thing doesn't go out.
Well, that was the stupidest part about that is they wouldn't let us put it in our booth, so they put it down in the basement and left it all weekend.
Which show was this? This was the food and wine show again?
I think so.
It was a different show, but it was a similar system. Anyway, my question isn't about food shows. It's about you're in Bankley Hill.
Hey, you said urine.
You and your company and all the people that you're hiring, a good amount of them, if not 90% of them, they're out in Bankley Hill. Bankley Hill's not a metropolis. When you began your essentially your business life, you were in Toronto. You were doing what you did in a big mecca. Now you're in a city that is it's 10 to 5% the size of any of these large cities that you've lived in the past. And I say this from an element of jealousy, but I go out there when I go out to visit you guys, and I want to stay out there. I want to, part of me wants to live out there so I can be close to you guys. But
Super
you're-
fan right
you're,
here.
you're essentially creating a draw to a neighborhood and a community that is not, a traditional community. And do you have any trouble attracting employment, or but what? On top of that, what do you do to make it so that people want to come out and move to not downtown Ottawa, or downtown Toronto as one of the biggest craft brewers in Ontario? You're bringing people to a rural community, not downtown Ottawa or downtown, Toronto, or, for that matter, the next one down, where is it, Kingston.
Yeah.
You're bringing them to a rural community.
Yeah, that is getting easier as we are getting more well known. Because again, one of the things we try to do when we're hiring is first try to find another unemployable friend. But then when that fails, we want people that are already super fans. And so when we put out a post, back in the early days when there was just 5 of us trying to convince someone to move to Vankleek Hill for a startup, uncertain kind of company, that was pretty tough. And we really struggled at times trying to bring people to the brewery. Now, for the most part, there's enough people that are excited about what we're doing that it's worth moving to Vankleek Hill. And because we've got a few years of track record under our belt, the worry that they're going to come and then we'll go out of business 6 months later is kind of diminished. So what we get a lot of actually for when we hire people from the area, the thing that we find attracts them most is that they're usually coming to us from another company that failed. And there's so many people that have they've gone from one company after another, and they've either been downsized or laid off or something because the company's not thriving. So the prospect of working for a company that's not downsizing but growing is a big advantage. People that are already excited about what we're doing, obviously a huge advantage. And we're at the point now where we're getting, for some positions, up to like 200-300 applications in, which is wonderful. Because I remember putting out the post, and 2 weeks goes by and nobody's applied. So it has been challenging, but it's one of those things. The longer our track record goes, and the more that people are aware of who we are and what we're about, the easier that's getting.
I feel like it comes back to the Kool-Aid comment. You could easily start a Bose comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got
Yeah.
one last question? Yeah, go ahead.
So since you sort of inspired a lot of other craft beers to sort of come up and tag along and the Beau's train, do you find that additional sort of, I guess, technically is competition to your industry, has that played what type of role has that played in the growth of your business?
I'm glad you asked that. I've got a very different view than the norm when it comes to competition. I really see other craft brewers as my compatriots, not my competitors. I think we're all in this together, and we've all got the same goal of making wonderful beer. And when we first started off, it was so isolating, and John Graham from Church Key used to always tell me I was doing missionary work out in the area, and he really felt like that sometimes. We've done a lot to actually grow the Ottawa brewery scene. We've lent fermenters to Beyond the Pale. We literally gave Castle Brewing out of Castleman our bottling line. Kitchissippi, Broadhead, we've given them both either growlers or growler caps when they've run short. It was just yesterday, Broadhead was short on grain, so get them some grain. My feeling on this is that what all of us as craft brewers are competing against is the status quo of the macro brewed beer. And initially when especially over the last couple of years, there's been so many new entrants, And you can, if you're worried about it on a restaurant by restaurant basis, you can say, yeah, everyone that drinks Beau's is going to be that much more likely to try another craft beer. So if there's another tap next to ours, we lost that 1 pint of sales every time they do that. But what we've just gained is for every one of those breweries, we've gained their sales force too. Because every time they get an account and convince someone else to try their craft beer, that makes them that much more likely to try ours. And I think all of us together have the ability to take sales that really should be there for craft beer. I kind of look at the craft brewing, what people would call a trend or a fad or whatever. I see it as a market correction. Every community should have a certain number of regional breweries that are active and thriving. And to have a situation in Ontario where 4% of the market is from local breweries doesn't make sense. So the growth rate you're seeing is bringing things back to normality. I don't think it's I don't think it's a trend or a fad. I think it's just the way things should be. And the thing that usually stands in the way of that happening is stupid competition between brewers that can't see the bigger picture. So seeing the bigger picture for me is understanding that for every new craft brewery that opens up, that is bringing people to try more craft beer, which does the industry good, which eventually does me more good than me selling that pint of beer to that customer. I think that was the last one.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, I got just 2 quick announcements. I want to make sure I don't get them wrong here. Back in November, I think it was, one of our past speakers was David Chan from Day Job Documentary, a quick startup documentary that was filmed at Extreme Accelerator in Toronto over the course of one of their cohorts. It was here just before Christmas, but I know a lot of people kind of missed it. Anyway, there's a second showing at Algonquin. It's their first major production. They're a startup too. It'll be there March 25th, 7 p.m. You can check out Day Job Doc for tickets. The second thing is Legacy Conference. It's an entrepreneurship conference, 1-day event. March 22nd at Ottawa City Hall, 8 to 5. You can check out legacyconference.ca. And Startup Grind, the code will give you 20% off a ticket to go check that out. They got some amazing speakers there that day as well. I want to give a big round of applause to Steve for sharing the story with us. And of course, the beer in the back. Thank you.
And thanks to Chris for pouring beer.
Chris, good job.
Thank you, Chris.
Cool. That's it.